Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar that we are hosting for you today. We're talking about responding to top-down and bottom-up pressures for reducing embodied carbon in manufacturing. My name is Laura Drury. I work in the Sustainability Communications team here at One Click LCA. It's my pleasure to be hosting this session alongside a brilliant lineup of speakers. This is really a unique opportunity to get the perspectives of a manufacturer, an industry organisation that works to influence change in the industry, and also a solution provider working with some of the biggest manufacturers across the globe. So I'll let them introduce themselves in just a moment. But before I do that, for those of you who are not familiar with One Click LCA, we're the market-leading sustainability platform for decarbonising projects and products across the built environment with the mission to power the makers of a zero carbon future. You can learn more about who we are, the work we do, and who we work with at oneclicklca.com. And I'll also drop the link in the chat shortly. And so in today's session, our speakers are going to be digging into how far we've come as an industry and why the decarbonisation of construction materials is so important right now. We'll be talking about why customers and specifiers are playing an increasingly significant role in manufacturers becoming more sustainable. We'll be talking about the regulations that are going to be making it mandatory for manufacturers to showcase the embodied carbon of their products. We'll then take a look at EPDs and how they can help manufacturers respond to these increasing pressures. And finally, we'll hear a real-life case study from Unilin about how they're ensuring that they're prepared for a more sustainable and regulated future. And then just to wrap up, towards the end of the session, we'll have our live Q&A. So please do drop your questions into the chat or the Q&A box down your right-hand side of your screen at any point during the session, and we'll get to as many of those as possible later on. So let me hand over to our speakers to introduce themselves, and we'll start with you, Mark.
Thanks, Laura. So my name is Mark Walsh. I'm the Product Management and Development Engineer for Unilin Insulation. So Unilin Insulation, we're formerly known as Etratherm, and they manufacture PIR, phenolic and EPS insulation. And in part of that, I would be responsible for developing the product development and all aspects of EPDs, LCAs and sustainability.
Brilliant, thank you. And over to you, Simon. Oh, have we lost Simon? Looks like Simon might have frozen.
Hi everybody, good afternoon. Sorry, good afternoon. Sorry, someone trod on my Wi-Fi line. So I'm CEO at the Alliance for Sustainable Building Products. We're a not-for-profit organisation. We're mission-driven. I'll talk a bit more about that in a bit more detail. I'm a general practice chartered surveyor and have been working in sustainability for over 25 years. So thank you very much, and over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Simon. I'm Tom from One Click LCA on the EPD team. I've been in the sector since around 2018, working first in academia. So I did kind of my PhD on the LCA and construction products, and now at One Click, and help our clients meet all their kind of EPD needs, basically.
Brilliant, thank you. Great introductions. And so I guess I'm going to kick off with the big question. We're going to get straight into it, and I'm going to ask all of you this, starting with you, Simon. Why are we talking about this today? Why is this such an important topic?
Well, we all know that COP29 is underway. We all understand, I hope, that we're in a climate crisis, and so the scale of the task is significant. And EPDs, environmental product declarations, are one way of a manufacturer showing that they believe in sustainability, that they're transparent, they're third-party verified, of course. So it's absolutely crucial that we drive down the embodied carbon in our buildings and our refurbishments. And EPD is one tool in the box that allows us to fulfill that process.
Brilliant, thank you. And then Mark, if I can come to you next, from a manufacturer's perspective, how have you seen the industry change? Why is this so important to be talking about now?
Sure. So one of the key things is that kind of discussion of embodied carbon isn't a relatively new one. There have been groups for over 2 decades who are discussing how to lower this, but it's only really in the past 3 to 4, maybe 5 years, where it's become a topic of general conversation. So for manufacturers, the key thing is to have something measurable that we can show, for one, see how we are progressing, and then have a metric to compare it against. So for ourselves, this is a key thing, and it's important for the construction industry as a wider whole to be able to gauge what they're doing and to improve it, because as Simon touched on, it is something that not only is coming, but is happening at the moment in relation to the climate crisis, and something that has to be addressed immediately. So that is kind of the key problem at the minute.
Great, thank you. And then Tom, for you personally, with your kind of industry experience and from the perspective, I guess, of a EPD solution provider, what's your thoughts on this?
I mean, definitely we're getting more and more requests every day. We ask people generally when we start the journey with them, kind of what are your goals, what are your deadlines? And everyone's saying kind of they needed this yesterday, really. So when they sign up with us, it's always kind of, we need it as soon as possible, and we work to kind of meet the deadlines, try and kind of help you as quick as possible. So yeah, we can see there's a lot of demand, and as we'll see kind of now in this webinar with Simon and Mark, kind of this top down but also bottom up approach. Maybe I can pass on to the next slide as well. So just on this slide here, you can see maybe on the left, if we're looking at kind of top down, and on the right bottom up, we can see on the left we've got legislations and standards, quite a few UK applicable ones. You can see also kind of the dates are really very recent, kind of this year we're looking at. Also at the EU level, these will kind of generally apply to kind of UK manufacturers as well. And on the right hand side, just EPDs in numbers. So thinking maybe more on the bottom up side, like this graph isn't linear, it's going up kind of exponentially. So we can see, even though it's largely been voluntary up until now, the numbers are increasing. So it is on people's radars. They are kind of investing on this. So it means kind of probably seeing a return on investment, of course. So hopefully, yeah, with this slide, you can see, based on kind of today's topic, top down, bottom up, you can see here both sides of this story.
Brilliant, thank you. And so let's move on to this next point. And just, I know for me personally that at One Click LCA, we're seeing a real shift in the conversations that we're having with manufacturers. And we're hearing a lot that transparency around embodied carbon is now critical, because customers and specifiers are asking for this information. And it's quite often a deal breaker when it comes to just having products selected. There's this real kind of sense of urgency now. So Tom, if I pass back to you just to continue that kind of train of thought, would you agree? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we're seeing kind of this increase in demand isn't going away. We get people kind of like come to us saying, I need it for a tender, or I'm going to lose a project. People that have lost projects because they don't have the EPD and they need to get them done so they don't miss out on future opportunities. So it's a tricky moment, and kind of I've probably worked with over 100 companies by now, kind of getting their EPDs. So it's kind of, I guess on my side as a service provider, it's quite exciting to see such a diverse kind of product range coming in to One Click LCA, working with so many different customers. Each company's different, so it's very engaging for me, and it's interesting seeing how people learn as well. Start to do LCAs and EPDs, because before it was with consultants, and that is more time and more cost. But as you bring it in-house, you kind of upskill internally. It's definitely very interesting and engaging as well.
And Simon, what are your thoughts on that question specifically around that sort of bottom-up pressure?
Well, there's pressures, yeah, as you know, as Tom has been saying, there's pressures both bottom up and top down. So, you know, I met with the embodied carbon team at Ministry of Communities, Housing and Local Government the other day, and there's a team of 3 now that sit in the embodied carbon team, and there's no doubt about it that government are looking at regulating for embodied carbon. I don't know when that's going to happen exactly. We've got a new government. There's quite a lot for them to work through, as we know. There is a report by AECOM that has been sort of engaging with stakeholders to look at, see whether the industry is ready for regulation. Do we have the right tools? Do we have everything in place? Is it going to be a big burden on the construction industry when at the moment, it's a little bit fragile? So there are sort of few questions to look at. Maybe the timing is not now, but it is going to come. So we look across the channel, and there are so many countries that have introduced it, and Europe is basically mandating EPDs. So I think that we will just have to follow, because of course companies will be wanting to export into Europe, and at the end of the day, architects and particularly clients are really engaging with this whole embodied carbon conundrum and looking to drive it down. And so people like British Land, are really, they're doing calculations on every single development they do. And so are large contractors. And so to enable them to do these things, we need EPDs. So it's absolutely crucial.
Absolutely. And Mark, always, the straight from the horse's mouth, for want of a better phrase, as a manufacturer, how's that been for you, that kind of bottom up pressure from customers and specifiers needing this information?
It's interesting in a lot of ways, in that there is a demand for EPDs and information in relation to the embodied carbon of your product and that sort of thing. But the issue which you're having with it is, and it's something I think each of us has nearly touched on it already, is that it's a quite difficult subject. So in that you could have some specifiers or some architects, some contractors who would have good knowledge of carbon or embodied carbon and LCAs, or that would just come along and ask, how green is your product, or kind of word terminologies like that. So a lot of what we're finding is that it's nearly trying to educate whoever you're dealing with, or to spread the knowledge as much as you can to make sure that people understand what an EPD is. I know, again, we're going to touch on this further, so I'm not going to elaborate too much on it now, but EPDs themselves are very difficult to read because the topic is quite deep. So because of that, when we are dealing with people, we have to make sure that, again, when you're looking at things, you're comparing apples with apples and not essentially with oranges, so that people know exactly what they're looking at and what the data actually means. For us, there is a much better, there's an increased demand in it, but there is still a long way to go. And I think until, with other people having metrics like, say, the net zero carbon building standards, REBA, LETI, GLA, the Future Homes Hub, there's various metrics and targets out there, but nearly because of that, then it's nearly diluting the message, because some people then get confused because, again, they're not sure what they're comparing it to. So there is a lot of work being done. There is a lot of good work out there, but there is a massive need for education, for it to remove the fear behind it, because, again, because it's a big subject, a lot of people are wary of kind of dipping their toe in the water, so to speak.
Great, thank you. There's some really good insight there, really interesting points, I think, being made. And I guess I want to kind of move on the conversation slightly to lean into the title of the webinar, the top-down pressures that we're going to talk about. So really here we're talking about the regulatory landscape that's evolving. Simon, I know you're going to take us through some slides shortly, but I just want to kind of ask our other two speakers first. Thomas, I know you touched on this briefly earlier on, but what are your thoughts on how regulations are going to drive real change, and when do you think we're going to hit this turning point, I guess, where this really becomes a mandatory thing?
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to say when we'll see this turning point, but it's definitely approaching, because I think kind of coming to the end of this year, we start to reflect on kind of this past year and the year before, and we've seen that we've kind of trained double the amount of companies compared to last year. So obviously big demand with the upcoming regulations, like the sustainable products regulation. We'll be moving to more kind of harmonized standards as well. So while we've always been following kind of EN and ISO standards, maybe if people were dubious about EPDs, like comparability, because there's different program operators, we're going to be moving towards like more harmonized standards as well. So that will be definitely interesting. So hard to predict the turning point, but it's definitely near. Yeah,
it's coming. And you, Mark, keen to get your thoughts there.
Sure. So I think, to be honest, it's the very much where the needle that I can see turning will be where the government does introduce a very, or as much as black and white as it can be, that you have to have these, or you need LCAs, or an EPD must be provided if you are to be used in certain projects. Because at the moment, you can see in certain sectors of the business that there is improvements. Like obviously, yourself, Laura, and Tom just mentioned, sure, the demand you've had for EPDs and just training and LCAs and that sort of thing is, I'm sure it's colossal. And anyone I've talked to in the industry has said the same. They've seen a massive upshot in the past 2 years, particularly. But then you're at the stage where we're nearly still at the early trendsetter side of things. So we still have people who are looking to, again, show their products, show their buildings, improve the sustainability of everything related to the buildings in the country. But then you have others that nearly have to wait until it is regulated. And you see the same thing. You saw the same issue that there was with, say, U values or thermal calculations in relation to retaining heat in buildings. There's always the early trendsetters, and then there's the rest that follow along when essentially they have to, which is unfortunate. That's what's going to be required. But I would expect that's where we'll see the massive jump, or when something is announced, as in possibly, if the one that's been talked about quite a lot is Part C, if that does come into effect or is scheduled to come into effect with, let's say, a concrete deadline, then you might see something. Hopefully, we'll see something, the biggest shift that we hope to expect.
Great, thank you. So let me pass to you, Simon. I know you're going to take us through some slides. So over to you.
Thanks, Laura. So so as I was saying, I work for the Alliance for Sustainable Building Products. So we're a not-for-profit organisation. We are mission-led, and our mission is there. So what do we do? Well, we share our learning through a range of events. We did an event on EPDs, in fact, last week with RICS. We have about 4 research projects on the go at any one time. We've done lots of work around trying to sort of demystify EPDs for architects and for clients. There's lots of resources, free resources on our website. So if you look in our resources section and search for EPD, you'll find lots of briefing papers there. We collaborate widely with professional organisations and bodies, and we aim to influence policy. So hence my meeting with MCHLG the other day. So I'm not going to dwell on this too long, but we're a busy organisation. We've had 44 new members so far this year. One Click are members and have been members for some considerable time. We've got lots of very useful guidance and toolkits on our website. So this is a picture of our mass timber insurance playbook. And that has been downloaded nearly 10,000 times. And there's a US version due out this week. It's been picked up in Japan, South Africa, and we're reissuing it in December. So we've got a range of really useful stuff on our website. Loads of events. We've got an event on tomorrow, and we have annual awards as well. So our event on tomorrow is looking at reuse and how we can reduce the amount of waste from the construction industry and how we can reuse more products in refurbishments and new builds. And I'm really excited to see Tina. So Tina is our RICS president. I think it's the first time in its history that RICS has had a female president. So she's our keynote speaker. There'll be about 150 people at the building centre tomorrow afternoon. There's still 1 or 2 tickets left for sale. So if you're interested in reuse, it starts at 1 o'clock tomorrow at the building centre. We will be writing it up and doing a blog. So just sign up to our newsletter. It's free from our website. These are the events that we have got. So we did one the other day on Building Safety Act. We're at London Build next week. If anybody is at London Build, come and say hello. We've got a very interesting event on how we might develop integrated risk or integrated project insurance. So join us for that. And then we've got a range of other events as well. So yeah, just see what's coming up. And then just to give you the big picture about embodied carbon and where it sits within the construction process. So about 1 in 10 tonnes of UK's total greenhouse gas emissions are from our embodied carbon emissions, and they relate to the production and the use of construction materials. And that's a very big number. So more than the aviation and shipping emissions that we are responsible for. So you can see why this is such an important area for us to look at. And internationally, you know, it's a global process now. So I'm a member of United Nations environmental group, and so we have global discussions on EPDs. This particular EPD that you can see on the right-hand side is for Thermofleece. Thermofleece are quite a small company. Well, I mean, the Thermofleece is the brand, it's sheep's wool insulation, and they invested in EPD. They saw that the market required an EPD, and it means that they can be transparent, they can be seen to be transparent. So our mission says demonstrably sustainable building products. So if you're wanting to sort of demonstrate that you are taking sustainability seriously, investing in an EPD is a sensible step. Yeah, so Eden have 3 EPDs that they've invested in, and it just helps with their claims about the product. So how are EPDs used? Well, you can't say anything about your product really in the continent without an EPD to back it up. So there is still quite a lot of greenwashing prevalent in our industry, and that helps to tamp that down. So in Norway, they're using it for public procurement. And then in Italy, it's about recycled content. In this country, you can get credits in BREEAM, and you can also get credits in LEED. And then it's part and parcel of assessments in Germany and Belgium. And then, you know, so France, Netherlands, Denmark, Finland, and Sweden have all mandated embodied carbon regulation. So I live in Deal, which is, I can see France most days. So if I go over to France, it's absolutely mandatory that you have an EPD for your product, and every building you have to do a life cycle analysis for. So, you know, it's global and it's everywhere and it's coming here. So when will it be mandated? Well, that's the big question. We sort of know it's coming in Europe. So, you know, 2025 is when EPDs will be mandated in Europe. And then you can see the trajectory here. So all new large buildings in the EU member states will have to do an embodied carbon assessment by 2028, and then all new buildings by 2030. So it's definitely coming. So in the UK, there's this organisation called Part Z. They have a website, and basically it's a gathering of industry professionals and leaders to say that the industry is ready to mandate for embodied carbon regulation. And there's a policy paper there that's been sent to the Labour government. As I mentioned, I met the embodied carbon team at NCHLG the other day. Bayes also has an interest and a watching brief around embodied carbon, as does DESNES. So it's a sort of through the government, it's threaded through the government. And then we've had the launch of the net zero building standard. I think there were 4,000 people on that call when it launched the other day. And there are embodied carbon regulate or sort of benchmarks included within that standard. So, you know, it's definitely coming from a sort of top-down approach. And then, as I mentioned, leading clients, contractors, architects are all looking at embodied carbon. There's a lot of different tools out there, but you it's an upsurge of interest, so it's absolutely crucial. So thanks, Laura. Is there anything else you wanted me to cover?
No, I think that's perfect for now. Thank you. I think it's safe to say we're going to see some real change in the industry in the not too distant future. I think now I'd like to talk or pass over to Tom more correctly to talk about how manufacturers can respond to these pressures. So we've talked a lot about the urgency and the need for preparing for change coming, essentially. And so let me pass over to you, Thomas. I know you're going to take us through a bit more about environmental product declarations and what they are, assuming, everyone on the call has an understanding around what they are. I think it's just good to cover what they are, why they're used, how they're used, and most importantly, the risks of not having them as we look at this kind of new future.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Laura. Just on this first slide, maybe we'll just discuss what are EPDs. Maybe you're very familiar with them and maybe you're completely new, so we'll just cover this to start. So an EPD is essentially like an LCA report verified by an accredited third party to ensure its credibility, transparency, and comparability to this kind of statement that you're providing. It stems from the key, let's say, generic standards, the ISO 14040 and 44 and LCA. Then we have this ISO 14025. These are kind of the rules for type 3 environmental declarations. So these are externally verified declarations. And then in the European and UK markets, we have this EN 15804 standard, which was updated in 2019 and came into effect in 2022. These are the product category rules. So it's like the LCA rules we need to follow. I have an analogy that if you've been in our boot camps, you might have heard that think of an EPD like a nutrition label, basically, but for the environmental impacts of products. So an EPD essentially you have kind of text, descriptive text, but you also have always a reference unit or declared functional unit, and then you have all your impacts as well. I'll move on to the next slide. So EPDs, why are they needed? I mean, we've discussed this a lot already in this webinar. Here we can see, for example, in the latest UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, here we can see that for building LCA, you will need an EPD. And it's important to note that an EPD is different from an LCA in the sense that an EPD is a third-party verified LCA assessment or report. So it's very important to note this kind of third-party verified side of things. What are the risks of not having them? So maybe just from my experience, we've seen kind of missed business intenders. So kind of large projects will need LCAs. So you need to have this kind of document as a prerequisite to even kind of be part of it. Missed opportunities as well, kind of for architects and engineers, if they're doing lead and BREEAM projects, your EPDs will essentially be like a data point in their analysis. And if you don't have that data point for them, then you're missing out on the opportunity to even kind of appear on their radar. Like, for example, if they're in the software looking for maybe like a steel beam and you provide that steel beam, they will be able to see kind of your data point essentially. Also, it's quite a marketing document as well. So it's not just a technical tool, but it's also a marketable document that you can have on your website or kind of in your own kind of company webinars, showing it's a verifiable claim. Again, we talked about kind of greenwashing earlier. It's a verifiable claim that you're kind of dedicated to sustainability. And if we start thinking about kind of net zero and what's next, I know we're at the stage where kind of people are starting to think about EPDs, but if we think about what's next, of course, you can't manage what you can't measure. I think this is a classic kind of businessy kind of phrase that's thrown around. But of course, if you haven't measured or done your LCA, you don't know where your impacts are coming from. Do you need to find more sustainable suppliers, or do you need to improve kind of your production energy? If you haven't done your first LCA, you can't really identify those hotspots. I'm not a salesman, but I'll just talk a bit on kind of why One Click LCA. I've been in the sector for a while on academic side as well. So the key kind of benefits that I've seen from One Click LCA is, of course, the database. We're doing a quantitative analysis here, number-based analysis. Data's key, and you need a good database. So One Click LCA has the largest database in the construction sector. So having all that data at your hands is, of course, fundamental. We also released the Materials Compass, and there is a free version as well. So if you search like One Click LCA Materials Compass, you'll find it on Google, and it's a bit like an easy way to browse all the CO2 numbers, basically, for construction products. So feel free to just kind of type in Google Material Compass One Click LCA. There's videos on our YouTube as well for that. Okay, so that's data, but what about actually doing your EPD? So our workflow is quite streamlined. Basically, you'd kind of create your project, collect all the data, input your data in the software, finding the correct data points, conduct your LCA. We have tools for kind of the 15804 standard, Tracy results if you need to sell in North America, FDS for the French market. As Simon mentioned, you have to have an EPD there. Also for the Netherlands, so we're kind of a bit of a one-stop shop for kind of your EPD needs. Then once you've done your LCA, from the results, you generate your EPD Word document, and you can also send it straight to verification from the results page as well. So quite a streamed kind of workflow. We want to make it as easy as possible for you. Then finally, I'll just touch on kind of what's next. Like we've seen a lot of people that come to us, they want EPDs, but previously it was more of like a box checking exercise. It's like, do you have an EPD? Cool, that's it. And that's maybe why a lot of people did it with consultants. But now, because it's more of a numbers game as well, people are kind of, they want to take it in-house. That's why they kind of start to work with us to upskill and do it all in-house. And as we're thinking about it, maybe as more of a numbers game, that's where kind of our offerings can come into play. So I mentioned Materials Compass, you can see on the left. This is where you can see kind of products in the market. You can search like brick, and you will see all the data for different bricks. Then also kind of in the software, you can also kind of market your product. So you can see here an example. If someone's searching for a ground floor slab, they'll see these products here. And also quite a new addition, this one here on analytics. So basically you can start to identify as a manufacturer who's using your products and how. So that really helps you to understand kind of where maybe you need to focus on. And again, thinking kind of beyond the box checking exercise, you're kind of using and applying that data. Also, just to talk about our training, kind of we do the EPD onboarding. We take you kind of through quite a practical training where we do kind of your first LCA EPD together with you. And we recently launched an eco design course, which again, as it's a numbers game, we're looking at, okay, you've done kind of the LCA EPD, what's next? And we talk about eco design, and we see people come back like, oh, I need to re-verify my EPD because my supplies changed and my CO2 is better now. So that's a bit on the One Click LCA side.
Brilliant, thank you. Really, really comprehensive overview. And yes, you're not a salesperson, but you positioned that perfectly. And I could, Tom works very closely presenting a lot of our academy content around EPDs. I can highly recommend the courses that he presents. So I'll drop the link to the academy in the chat shortly. And so now I'm going to pass over to you, Mark, for a bit of a case study. I think this is a really good opportunity for anyone watching to understand, what this looks like in real life from a manufacturer's perspective. So let me pass over to you, and looking forward to hearing all about this.
Great, thanks for that, Laura. So just to set the scene for this study. So back in 2021, we were at probably the early stages of EPDs and LCA. So we had our first EPD published in 2018, and by 2021, all the products in our range had their own EPDs. So we felt we're at a good stage. But the issue we had was that though we had an understanding of EPDs, we didn't really understand or comprehend how they impacted. So how do they impact when they're used? So you often hear people saying that And like Thomas touched on there about the need for EPDs and to show how you're looking to, again, improve your embodied carbon and how you're trying to improve your sustainability. And again, as Simon touched on, so that companies aren't able then to greenwash and say their product is green or has a low GWP when it doesn't. So we wanted then to put this into practice. So what we were looking to see was, for one, how does an EPD impact on an LCA? And for another is what is actually involved in the creation of an LCA? So how much work is involved? How thorough does it have to be? So we then listed a company called XCO2. So they're London-based environmental engineers, and they would have extensive knowledge and experience in creating LCAs for different builds. So the key thing was that obviously we wanted to have a look at what would be the typical build in UK. So we set 4 different house types. You've got your detached, semi-detached, your mid-terrace home, and your apartment. So we felt it covered, say, the broad spectrum. We looked mainly at residential because, to be honest with you, that's where most of the data was available. If we looked at more, say, industrial and, say, commercial, there would have been a lack of data available, or much more so, definitely so, a lack in comparison to the residential data. So that was the reason behind that. And the other aspect then was we needed to have metrics to set it against. So what we selected was the REBA Climate Challenge 2030 targets. I'll touch on them shortly in a minute as well. So just to show people, and again, so these might be familiar to some, less familiar to others. These are the standards that the LCA was created to. So you have EN 15978. That is one of the, essentially, the cornerstones of LCAs. The reason why that might be familiar to some is that's currently undergoing an update at the moment. So that is very closely aligned with RICS, which again I'll touch on in a moment as well. And that was due to be published last year, but at the moment it is actually still in consultation. So it's been slightly delayed. And then the bottom standard is, or guidance document even, is the RICS information paper. So again, it's just, this is more so just for your general knowledge rather than go into this great depth of standards, because I know the standards, they can take a long time to go through. So what RICS is, RICS have the methodology for calculating LCAs, which again, I'm sure people know, it's a life cycle assessment. To break down RICS into kind of an understandable graphic, we have the image here. So if you take, for example, you have your standard cavity wall, you have your block, you have your insulation, you have your brick. So what you would essentially do for this would be, you'd work out the quantity of bricks, blocks, insulation that you have, you multiply it by the embodied carbon factor, so that's what you would ascertain from your EPDs. And then that would represent then the impact that each element has. They're added together, and that is what the embodied carbon of that element is. And that would follow along all the way through for the different elements. Again, each home is, or each element of the house is broken down into foundations, structures, the wall, the roof, the services, and everything else. So RICS goes into great detail in that. And again, it's quite a large document to read, but it gives fairly comprehensive guidance in how to calculate it. So that's just, again, setting the groundworks for what was used to calculate it. It's also important to note that RICS is a methodology of choice that's used for various calculation tools like GLA, EP, or LETI, REBA, and again, the Future Homes Hub. So as I said, if you're trying to calculate something, you need something to aim for. So the REBA Climate Challenge came into effect in 2019 for its first iteration, essentially, and those were actually revised in 2021, I believe. And these are those figures. So what they will do is they've broken it down into 3 different targets. So you have your business as usual, which is what would have been the 2020 targets. And that's what they believe would have been what people are currently hitting, what is currently being hit at the moment. So we've got your operational energy, which a lot of people will be fairly familiar with. That's how much energy your home produces or how much carbon your home produces. So that's what the whole reason behind is in using air source heat pumps or insulating your home to a higher standard or using making sure that your home is draft proof and all those sort of things, to make sure that you don't waste energy or use excess energy heating your home. So those are those various targets. They're taken from metered bills. So essentially you will get your bill and then you can use that to gauge the operational carbon of your home. The potable water is just the water that is used per day in your home. Again, different things can be used for that. You can have a restriction on your tap. You can have your showers and outside modified. I'm not going to go into that much detail, just what that is in the bottom. The key metric there is the embodied carbon. So what they were saying was that apparently there is 1,200 kilograms of CO2 per meter squared of your home. So if you take in the context, most homes in the UK would have a GIA or a gross internal area of about at least probably 102 meters squared. So you then multiply that by 102 and you're getting nearly a million kilograms of CO2 per meter squared. 120,000 per meter squared. So it's quite a large number. And again, the aim would be to hit the 2030 target of 625. So that was the metric we set in this calculation. A few important things just to touch on here is that obviously the key thing with anything where you're calculating is the quantities that are used. If you assume you've used 200 kilograms of concrete, it's going to make a massive difference in opposed to if you actually use 150. So we had to make sure that the quantities we were using are accurate. For one thing, to make sure the results are accurate, but also again to make sure that this report was practical. It wasn't just a theoretical exercise. It's something that actually you could apply to a home built in the UK today. So we had an independent QS or quantity surveyor that was used to calculate all these. And we also used One Click LCA software. Now, again, I know Tom touched on the fact that they have a broad database there. But again, this just serves to drive that point home. When we were looking for this and looking to calculate these, we had a look across the various databases and various software providers out there. And to be honest, none could really hold a candle to One Click. They have a vast database there, and it made it much easier because one of the key issues you have when you're creating LCAs, particularly in 2021, but obviously still to this day, is the gathering of data. And if you don't have data for whatever element you're using, say the slates on your roof, for example, one of the things you wouldn't really consider, then it's very difficult to create an LCA. You can spend days, nearly weeks, trying to find data points. So that's why One Click was a great assistance in this. And just one key thing to point out, and this is as per the guidance in, REBA, is that landscaping and pavement was excluded. So essentially what that means is that this isn't going to take into account the pavement leading up to your home or anything external to the house. Now, obviously people might say, well, obviously that should still be accounted for because it still has embodied carbon related to it. That's 100% correct. But the issue it is the reason it's excluded as part of the REBA assessment is that you can't then compare homes like for like. You can't control what kind of pavement, that sort of thing, is outside your home. And because of that, then you can't, the work you'd be doing on your home, it could be negatively impact on something that's outside your control. Whereas you start a house from scratch, you have control of what goes into it, how big it is, and what materials you use in it. So that was the logic in both REBA and Letty's guidance. So again, quick touch on here. The houses we used, detached, obviously you can see the size of them, and semi-detached, the apartment and the terraced. So what we had here was we wanted to look at not only what was used in the homes, but also what heating systems were used. So obviously a big issue that we've seen is the introduction of air source heat pumps, which have a massive impact in reducing the operational energy of your home for new builds. But we wanted to look into it and see, well, how would other heating systems work? So what we set up was an MVHR system with passive heating, so that's mechanical ventilation heat recovery. And then we thought, look at something that's not typically talked about in just your electric panel heaters. So it's anyone that's kind of came recently from college will know of these, because there would be kind of your backstop in these kind of homes. So we want to check how these impacted and what effect these had. And then we would set 2 comparison scenarios. So what we had was, we would have your default. So this would be using generic data points. And what would you be using if you didn't have a verified EPD or your known manufacturer that was being used? And then apply the 3 heating systems, and then have a improved one. So what we did was, we source EPDs that would be used in the UK. So one key thing or problem you could see with LCAs is that you sometimes see EPDs used that are from Sweden or Norway, some of those ones, because obviously, as I touched on, they are very far along in their embodied carbon battle or their sustainability. But it's not realistic, because it's not going to be used in your home in Devon. So what we did was, we sourced EPDs of manufacturers that would be used in the UK, to make sure that, again, this isn't just numbers on a piece of paper, this is actually practical. And if you were to go to build your home tomorrow, you could use these providers. So that was, again, the logic and setting the standard of what we were looking to do. You can see the baseline specification. So this is what was used. You can see the foundations had, again, your generic concrete strips, standard floor, concrete insulation screeds, intermediate floors, you had your acoustic wool between the timber joists, external wall, your block and brick insulation in between, internal walls, again, with your acoustic insulation, your roof with 100 mm insulation, 60 mm below, with concrete roof tiles. And then the refrigerant used with the air source heat pump was 1.3 kilograms of R40. And again, you can see the improvement specification there. I'm not going to go reading through them, so that you can either read it yourselves. So just, again, set a scene for people who aren't familiar with LCAs. This is what an LCA looks like when it's broken down between the different elements in your home and the different life stages of the product. And you can see there, it's a colossal amount of numbers, it's a colossal amount of data. And when you look at it straight on like that, it's extremely difficult to actually compute what any of it means and where it relates to. So what it was, we worked and collide this into essentially easily read graphs. Just an important thing that I'd ask you to know is that the 116,000, the total CO2 or kilograms of CO2 at the bottom there. I'll come back to that shortly. So just to break it down home by home. So with the detached house, you can see the baseline where we're using generic data points would have failed the 625 criteria set by Reba and Letty. And we also have the future home sub, which is another metric there, which is 615. So you can see here the baseline air source heat pump, which was a detached house. And you can see then the improvements here. So we can see changing nothing. If you look at the 2 air source heat pumps ones particularly, going from 628 to 507, purely by just using verified EPDs, shows the impact that can be made in using verified EPDs and how much that actually has. So when people say you should be looking to source your EPDs, that's what it's talking about. So it follows quite similar again. Semi-detached, you had it failing with the baseline, pass with the rest, and then the mid-terrace failed on the air source, failed on the improved, mainly because the area that it was involved in is quite low. Again, that's something I can discuss on further in the questions if people want to look further into it. And then you have your apartments, which again, you can see most people would have thought would be quite high because of the amount of concrete that we're using and because of the size of it, but purely because it has a massive meter squared, which is 1724, it gets divided out between it. And then because we were looking to compare different house builds, we looked at masonry versus timber to see how those impacted. And you can see here, obviously, with the baseline, again, it still fails. The improved masonry obviously has quite a good score, and the improved timber slightly improves it, but not as much as sometimes people might think. So it's interesting to see that it's very important to measure the data before assumptions are made, which is one of the key finds we found in this study.
Amazing. Thank you, Mark. That was a fascinating and incredible amount of information covered there. I remember listening to you at the Carbon Expert Summit in London, and this is just as interesting and, yeah, hopefully really useful to everyone watching. Just before we move on to some questions, which I can see coming in, just quickly, you know, we've talked a lot about EPDs here. If it's something you want to learn more about, if you want to book some time with one of our carbon experts at One Click LCA, you will see a poll pop up on your screen right now. Just let us know there. Just click yes if you'd like us to get in touch, and we will be in touch as soon as possible. Okay, so on to some questions before we wrap up. So I've seen a couple come through. We'll go in order. So the first question we have is from Harvey, and he says, what would be your best guess of EPDs becoming mandatory legislation in the UK? Is it 2026? And I'm going to give Mark a break. I'll pick on you, Simon.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have crystal balls. I don't. So we just know it's coming. I mean, we can see the transition. We can see it's on the horizon. So when it's going to be mandated, I'm not sure, but it's definitely coming. Yeah. So I don't want to be tied down to a date because I think that would be unfair. But if I do have any information over the coming months, I'm very happy to share it with you all.
Brilliant. Thank you. Mark and Tom, feel free to jump in if you have any additional insight that you'd like to share.
I wouldn't say I have more insight, to be honest, but I would think 2026 might be ambitious. But again, these kind of things can be funny. They can accelerate at kind of unknown rates. Purely what I'm coming from is if you look at other standards, say the Future Home Standard, for example, you can see that was in development for 2 to 3 years before it's nearly came to fruition. I would expect, and this has been, you can call it pessimistic or slightly realistic, whatever you want to look at. I would say you're probably looking at 2028 might be the earliest. But again, I fully hope that I am wrong. But as Simon said, it is most definitely coming. It is more just a case of when it comes.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I might jump in quickly as well. Sorry, Laura.
Okay.
Just to say that as we're on the topic of like the top down, bottom up, I mean, there'll be a legislation at some point. Just because I'll probably have my work cut out as well. So just to say that there are people saying, oh, we got asked 14 times this week for an EPD, we should probably have that. And then they come to One Click and say we needed it yesterday. So keep in mind that there is the legislation coming, but as well, there's the other side. There's the market demand. Big projects need EPDs. You'll be asked for this kind of environmental data. It's becoming more of a prerequisite, even before maybe there's a legislation mandating it. Yeah.
Yeah, all about being prepared. Okay, I have a question here from Debbie that I'm going to point to Simon. Are there sufficient skilled people to meet the increasing demand to create and verify EPDs? If not, are there any top-down initiatives emerging to provide these, especially for SME manufacturers? Good question.
Yeah, so there's no doubt about it that RICS see a market opportunity in providing this type of service, and they are offering a range of training to, I mean, they see sort of quantity surveyors as being the sort of best route really to assist with this process. So they are offering quite a lot of training at the moment. So there's more and more verifiers coming on board. But it's a generic, it's sort of supply and demand. So when the demand increases, the supply will no doubt follow. So, you know, there's no two ways about that. But I think One Click is probably the tool that's used most widely, it must be said. Some manufacturers can choose whether to do the process themselves or to bring in a third party. And there's, benefits to both of those. So if you do it yourself, you get to understand everything about your product. So my colleagues at Clayworks did an EPD on their clay plaster, and it even covered the string in the bag that the packaging was in. And certainly with Thermofleece, they realized that probably one of their biggest impacts was their plastic packaging. And so they have reduced, they've increased the recycled content of the packaging. So it's that sort of type of level of detail. You understand the hot spots, where are my biggest impacts for my products? What can I do about that? And so it does open up all sorts of opportunities for you to understand your product so much better than perhaps you do at the moment, because you will be interrogating everything involved in that product, from the materials to how it's made, to the electricity, to the power, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think there's sort of pros and cons. It is a complex process. There's a lot of information gathering required, as I'm sure Tom would agree with. So it's somebody, if you're going to be looking at this as a manufacturer, it's somebody who needs to be quite process driven. I don't think you need to be too technical, but you do need to work through a process. I don't know whether that's a fair comment, Tom and Mark. Does that sound about right?
I would say, yeah, 100%. It is very much, essentially, as I said, you don't have to be particularly technical, but you have to be very, very focused in the data you're using, and essentially what you said, because we've done a similar thing. We've worked with LCA, LCA lifecycle assessors, and we're prepared for it then as well. So again, just to touch on, I think, Debbie's question, just to clarify, what you will typically have is you'll have a lifecycle assessor who will do the bones of the work, which again is what One Click offer in relation to what you can do with their EPD program. You can do that yourself, and they'll for the guidance on that. And then you go to an external verifier who is third party, and then they will verify that everything has been inputted correctly and then it's all fine. I think there is going to be a massive demand for people in this industry and people in these professions. I would essentially compare it to when SAP assessments was at its height of demand, and you saw people who were in related fields like that, QSs, architects, that sort of thing, and they all started becoming SAP assessors. I would expect this will follow the same trajectory. And again, like Simon said, QSs will be well placed for this, because that's what our number is gathering data and making sure it's exact. That's very much so what this is as well. So again, the technical aspects you can learn, but it's very much to make sure that you're precise with your information.
Great, thank you. We are just about almost out of time, and I can see there's another couple of questions that have come in. So I will make sure that we come back to you specifically on those. We will answer those, but unfortunately our time is up. I'm just going to highlight one more thing, which is the One Click LCA Winter Sustainability Summit in December. This is happening. It's a 2-hour streamed event. You can find all the information on our website. I'll also include the link in our follow-up communications. Please do join us. This is all about sustainable materials, so very kind of fitting to what we're talking about today. And we've got loads of guest speakers from across the globe talking about this really important topic. So please do join us. And I guess all that's left to say is thank you to our speakers today. Really, really great. I've had a blast hosting today, so thank you. And thank you to everyone who's joined us as well. And for those questions that we didn't get a chance to get to, I promise we will reply to you personally today. So everyone have a good day, and thank you again.
All the best.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.